This panel is going to be moderated by Jeff Gauss of the Provenance Chain, joined by Ian Taylor of Simba Chain. Adam Schaeffer of the Department of Commerce is here, and also Dan McMorris, Provenance Chain as well. Gentlemen, I'm going to give it over to you.
Thank you all. Can you all hear me? So good afternoon. My name is Jeff Gauss. I'm the founder and the CEO of the Provenance Chain Network. And what we do is we provide a very basic service to companies and people. We help people and companies understand some very fundamental things about products. What is it? Where did it come from? How was it made? And who made it? And we do that primarily for national security issues. Our largest client is the United States Space Force. We're operating under 5 contracts with them. And what we do there is we give the launch commander the confidence to say, go for launch based on the pedigree of the products. So with me, we have Adam Schaeffer from the Department of Commerce CHIPS office. Adam, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Jeff. My name is Adam Schaeffer. I work for the Department of Commerce in the CHIPS for America program, and my role there is head of supply chain. What that means is a couple of different things. Working currently with the investments everyone knows that we're looking to make in fabs and fab technology clusters in the U.S., really measuring and driving supply chain resilience for those projects, and then supporting those projects with supply chain projects. So we're going to be, we've announced our second notice of funding opportunity dedicated to supply chains, and those projects will be the things that feed right into the fabs and support that structure. My experience, I spent about 15 years in supply chain as part of my 22 years at Intel Corporation, and so I'm hopefully really driving and leveraging that semiconductor experience today for the government and the underpinnings of all the things that you're trying to do today. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And with me from the National Defense University is Dan McMorris. Danny?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I'm Dan McMorris, happen to be from the Provenance Chain Network. However, I'm here today because I'm at the National Defense University as an industry fellow for the Eisenhower School of National Security and Resource Strategy. And what we are doing there is essentially organizing all the information to create the DoD's large data model with which they can organize the supply chain data, to Adam's point, for our nation's most sensitive and secure supply chains.
So, and also with it be is Ian Taylor, and Ian's the founder and the CEO of Simba Chain. And just a little known fact, the United States federal government is one of the largest spenders on blockchain technology. Number 2 in the list of the agencies that are spending money is the DoD. And between Simba Chain and the PCN, collectively, we've garnered about 80% of that spend. So congratulations, Ian, and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello? Okay. So I'm Ian Taylor, CEO of Simba Chain. My background is kind of in a research front. So I've done like a BSc, PhD, and then I went on this research journey, published a couple of hundred papers, like 12,000 citations, which led me to being a professor in Cardiff, UK, and also Notre Dame in the US. As soon as I arrived in Notre Dame, I wrote this proposal, which is the first time I came across blockchain, called Simba, and submitted it to DARPA. That got funded. And that led to a kind of a different path. So fast forward in a few years, we raised an A series in 2021, which led me to quit Cardiff University and take a leave of absence from Notre Dame to focus full-time on Simba. So what is Simba? So we've been working with PCN over the last year or so, I would say. So Simba started off being a platform that abstracts the kind of steps to blockchain specifics, right? So you can use a web interface to put transactions on chain and query them in the same way. More recently, we've gotten into securing data and been able to transfer and verify data, and that kind of focus area has bubbled up to almost everything we're doing nowadays. So that's kind of I think the most relevant piece for today.
Thank you. So, Adam, let's start with you. So, you and I had a conversation earlier this week about the CHIPS office, and what's going on with the Commerce Department. Tell me what is the CHIPS Act, and why should everybody in this audience care?
Yeah, thanks. So the CHIPS Act was passed about a year ago. a little more than a year ago August, and it is a stimulus package. It's really a divergence from most government funding that you may have been experienced in your lifetime and probably your parents' lifetime. It's been a long time since the U.S. has really done direct industrial policy. And the CHIPS Act really represents exactly that. It's a directed fund in two parts. There's $52 billion total, about $39 billion for projects that are statutorily directly to support manufacturing, and about $11 billion for research and development. And then there's some tech sector hub funding that's also gone out as well. That $39 billion is where I work, but of course, alongside with the R&D. And really, there's a few different purposes to that. We all saw in 21 that there was the constraint on semiconductors. It wasn't difficult to get a PC. It was difficult to get a dishwasher, and really was indicative of the dependence of that semiconductor supply chain globally. The other realization is that for leading edge semiconductor processors, the things you really are depending on to maximize speed, AI, and other applications were not being produced in the U.S. And that lead that particularly TSMC had developed in Taiwan really ended up with that geographic concentration. So not only did you have supply chain constraints, you also had a high supply chain risk. So even though the leading edge processors maybe weren't the most constrained part of the supply chain, there was a broad recognition that we're in a fragile spot. Lots of things could happen. I was recently in Taiwan, and there was a little earthquake. It wasn't a big deal, but it was a good reminder that it doesn't take much to disrupt a supply chain that's geographically concentrated. So the bill was passed. It was a bipartisan bill. It was actually started early on before this administration. So we want to make sure that everyone gets credit for really standing behind this process. It's really a national program. There are 46 or 48, I don't exactly remember, states with projects that are being considered under CHIPS currently. And those projects are really divided into a couple of different areas. We have what we call our NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunities. The first one is for large projects directly manufactured. The second one is for smaller projects on the supply chain. That's what my job is to execute, under $300 million. And the purpose is really to not solve all the problems in the semiconductor supply chain. It's too complicated for that. But the purpose is to really try to drive down that resilience and really get the government involved in really holding these companies not only to invest in America like other people have talked about on stage today, but invest in America with those kinds of the necessary stimulus to make it worthwhile, and to really make sure that the U.S. government is making the appropriate investments so that there is a direct return. I like to say this is not a subsidy. This is a stimulus. We need to push those balls down the hill and let them roll and gather steam.
So I had the opportunity to hear Secretary Raimondo speak at the NIST Semiconductor Standards Summit, and this audience is probably I would suggest, is a very libertarian, red meat crowd. Why is this a matter of national security?
So we like to talk about security, economic security, national security. There's lots of different ways you could talk about it, but it really is all intertwined. Some things are direct national security issues. And so if you think about high band gap compound semiconductors for high power and radiation hardened devices and things like that are traditionally really driven into the defense industry, they're competing right now with batteries, EV, and the chips going into automotive. That's one of the reasons why Europe is pushing this so hard as well. So again, it's really kind of pushing the resilience for direct national security product availability. The economic security angle as well is, again, if you have that geographic concentration and you have that intellectual concentration outside of the U.S., then we cannot really take advantage of the prowess that we have. And really, it's a matter of helping our smartest people be able to cash the checks they've been writing for decades and take that lead and keep it on shore and domesticate those value chains.
Thank you. So, Danny, what is a private citizen doing attending the National Defense University? I mean, what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'll give you an answer in June when I get through the program. Thank you, God willing. So the Eisenhower School of National Security and Resource Strategy is a school underneath the National Defense University. Apparently, Jeff, there are 7 different universities within the military that practice wargaming and scenario playing and projecting out what are security issues within supply chains. This is the only one that has industry, that includes industry. And there's 2 ways that this industry connects with Eisenhower School and with all of these future leaders. And the people going to this university, they get assigned, Jeff, are the 06s, the colonels and higher. There's brigadier generals. There's everybody, the colonels everywhere. And they're going to be running offices and departments in the future. So this is an opportunity for them to network across as well as solution different scenarios. The 2 ways that industry participates, one is they bring in fellows. So I'm an industry fellow from outside. I get to sit next to my seminar peers and explore these topics together, solve problems together. The other way is, and that happens in the first half, apparently, of the academic year. In the second half, you end up taking individual industries, and they call them industry studies. And I was telling Adam backstage, one of them is, obviously, semiconductors. They call it microelectronics. That is an issue for national security. This is the school that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs runs. And so he or she dictates, here are the 20 industries that I need our military to understand in depth, and that we divide into 20 different teams and explore those. So strategic materials, robotics, quantum, nuclear obviously is one, and semiconductors is one. There's 20 total industry studies, Jeff, but that's what an industry fellow, what a private citizen does to participate in that particular network.
Can you share what you're working on?
I just got assigned, actually, microelectronics and semiconductors. So I will be part of that particular seminar exploring in depth how semiconductors fits within national security. And to some of your questions, Adam, backstage, what happens? What does industry have to do to mobilize in the event of either a strategic competition or a strategic conflict between an adversary or even a competitor internationally? How do we set the stage up for industry to participate and support the future military or government, DoD or DOC, efforts and initiatives internationally?
Okay, so effectively we've heard what 2 cabinet-level programs, one being Department of Commerce, one being DoD. Let's come down into the technology a little bit. So Ian, we yesterday in the workshops, your people and our people talked a lot about digital assets and digital identities. Can you share with me what you're working on relating to national security with this?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned earlier that we've made the shift to data, and part of the reason for that shift to data is that we've been awarded recently a StratFi award with the Air Force. And what we're doing there is trying to secure assets and connect supply chains. So it's relevant to the conversations here for those reasons. But one of the things we're doing, we've got participants in the project, Tier 1, Tier 2, and the DoD, and they want to share data from Tier 2 to the DoD, Tier 2 to Tier 1, and Tier 1 to the DoD. It's all centered around an aircraft called the KC-46. And the way we're achieving that is using the specs, the W3C specs, along with blockchain, so the specs of the decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. And the way those work with data, and the way we've got them to work with data, is a DID normally represents a person. And the way the specs work, you create a DID, so say I create a DID for Jeff, and I can then, as an administrator, I can create a credential to Jeff's DID and ascertain something. So, for example, I could create a credential for Jeff to give him access to my system, whatever my system is. And he can present that credential. It's called a verifiable presentation. It goes through checks and balances. Is he who he says he is? Is the credential trusted? It's a digitally signed document. If so, he can be let in that system. For data, we've repurposed that to store data. So the way that works is that, say, for example, I transact data into the blockchain. It goes into the blockchain. It gets an NFT gets created for that data, where the data goes off chain. So the data is self-sovereign to the person that put it there. That's the only person that, the only entity that can access it. And then I can create a credential, and I can send that credential to Jeff, for example, and he can go in and access that data too. And the way this works with blockchain, the NFT that represents the data is actually the verifier. So all of the verification is done on chain, and that's important for the DoD because that code cannot change. So nobody can hack into that code. They can't hack into the process that is doing the verification and accepting Jeff, for example, into that data. And the other way you can use that is the NFTs themselves can be assigned DIDs. The data can have a DID too. So then Jeff can go in, take the data out. Maybe it's a specification for a chip. He can go out, he can look at it, use his expertise to figure out, is it within specification? And then Jeff can issue a credential to the NFT saying that that chip conforms to the specifications, and he basically verifies that data. So using all these these technologies together, you can basically create a supply chain scenario where each supplier dictates who they share the data with and what rules surround that sharing.
So speaking about merging technologies, Danny, talk to me about what you're thinking about or what you're hearing about blockchain and AI.
Yeah, the most exciting aspect of what I'm observing is that the conversations happening, at least within the NDU crowd, as they're digesting this concept of what Ian is talking about, and what we talked about here within the special interest groups for enterprise adoption is the same thing. And so what I'm seeing is that there's an understanding now within business. You saw the 46 states here on stage. The same issues that we've been talking with over the last 3 years that now came up to the enterprise team here in the last year are now becoming approached within the DoD. And things like understanding that you could have an NFT for a tangible object as well as an intangible object. And how that's important for national security is an intangible could be, for example, intellectual property. And intellectual property is an absolute necessity to solve so that we protect against stealth and theft from China, as an example. That's an open topic. Another example of how that is applied is understanding counterfeit within the supply chain for magnets in the ejection seats of an F-35, for example, or engine parts for an airplane. All of those aspects are now being understood separate from what people typically think of blockchain and crypto. It's actually blockchain as it applies to transactions within business. You heard RFK talk about transactional freedom. You heard previously talking about how this is going to be a team sport between blockchain and AI, for an example, right? Where blockchain organizes the information and optimizes for AI to hit it. We had a speaker come on stage, Jeff, and talk about how to get transparency that Ian's talking about with AI normally, even from tier 1 to tier 2. They're talking about having how many suppliers were from this tier 1 to tier 2, and the answer came back as 1,000, where the real answer was 4. And if you have these transactions that are immutable, not being able to be changed, captured on a blockchain, it optimizes for AI, and you can get a fast answer that's accurate. And the value of that, Jeff, is now being explored throughout all supply chains. That's the most exciting thing that I'm seeing, both on the enterprise side here from industry, is being mirrored on the defense side, the DoD and the DOC side within government. Very exciting.
Thank you. So Adam, you and I were talking off stage here about your historical background with Intel. And one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is just how complex the microelectronics, the semiconductor supply chain is. And so this bill was passed a year ago. Why is this problem not solved already? So,
yeah, that's a great question. I think if you look back at some of the supply chain traceability challenges that have been going on for a long time, right? It's not just recently that people have been worried about this. So whether it's downstream for counterfeit products or quality, or upstream for probably maybe the clearest example is the conflict minerals space, where that was one of the areas that I owned when I was at Intel, where the issues around tracking and tracing the source of materials that you can say with a degree of confidence, you were never perfect, and what the applications were for blockchain or others or other schemes. It's not the only one to drive fidelity into those schemes. So your data has a dependence, and some of that complexity really does get difficult, particularly with something like raw minerals, because raw minerals are melt, right? And so they go from something that's quite traceable to something that's mixed with wherever it is. And those challenges really also depend on very, very tactical, real challenges. The value of the commodity. Gold is much harder to trace than tin, for example, because it's much more valuable at lower volumes. So there's a lot of complexity there within that just the mineral supply chain. And you can multiply that to chemicals, you can multiply that to equipment, you can multiply that to global production, where you have global production for all of these things. It comes together into a fab. You make your silicon, you dice it up, and then you send it out into packaging infrastructure, which again is global, and then into an end device. So it is quite complicated. To actually answer your question, why hasn't this been solved already? I think we've made a lot of progress has been made. And I think to that point, where the governments can and have had a lot of influence here is the requirements for traceability, the requirements for whatever reason, right? You have in Europe, you're seeing more traceability requirements for human rights or environmental and ESG reasons. I think right now we're working with all of these fabs to say, hey, if we're going to make this investment, what are the details and what is your process for driving resilience all the way down to the material? Where are those concentrations, not to punish or to force, but to partner with the companies to help drive that capability into supply chains? Because they're already world-class and they're working really well. How can they work better in the future?
So we're coming up on end of time, and so I'm going to head towards final comments. So I'd like you each take about 90 seconds and tell me either how you will know we are successful in what we're doing, or a prediction of the future, starting with Ian. Let's go Ian, Danny, and then Adam, I'll let you end. Yeah.
You go first.
Oh, you first. Either how will you know you're successful in what we're doing here, or what is your prediction of the future? What does it look like in this space?
So I think, from a technology perspective, it's interesting that these technologies that this whole community is working on have arrived kind of at this time where, if you look at supply chains and where things are going in terms of, a decentralized battlefield, that's the battlefield of the future. These technologies like credentials, DIDs, and blockchain, they really help to solve those problems in a way that other technologies could never have solved them previously. So I'm kind of optimistic that we can build some of the infrastructure that is needed to support that effort.
Thank you. Danny.
I knew you were going to come to me next. All right. I think I'm going to predict the future, Jeff. What I see coming, application of this technology is now starting to be understood, which is exciting. We actually had an industry leader from a major company in the United States, a Fortune 10, let's just say that, stand up on stage and say, you know what we need? We need an early alert system. We need a reserve force. We need top-down guidance in order for the country to respond to a mobilization effort, much like we did in World War II. It's going to be completely different now. And the way that it's going to be completely different now, Jeff, we were talking about this backstage. When you have a counterpart like China who's got a centralized model, you can use a centralized technology. When you have a democracy, it's a decentralized model by nature, and your technology needs to match the problem. So my prediction of the future is that technology is going to be adopted and decentralized for all sorts of use to be able to help support that industry mobilization on all three levels that we were talking about within the Department of Commerce and the Department of Defense to the benefit of industry overall.
And Adam, final comments from the DOC, Department of Commerce.
I think I'll do both. My prediction for the future is a lot of people are saying the semiconductor industry is going to be about $1 to $1.2 trillion in 2030 to 2033, depending on the model. And the prediction of the future is that a significant and more significant than it is today portion of that economic activity is going to come through the U.S. That's the prediction for the future. The measure of success is maybe a little bit more tactical. The measure of success is this time next year, I'll be networking and talking to all the people I meet today and looking for a new job because we've been successful and we've given this money away and we've enabled that future to happen.
I thought I heard you say you were going to invest it as opposed to give it away, but maybe it's my hearing. So thank you all, very distinguished panel. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for attending. So
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.